The emergency room doors burst open with military precision as three men in civilian clothes stride through. Their eyes scan the sterile white room until they locate their target, a hospital bed where their teammate lies with gauze wrapped around his head and purple bruises covering his face. Officer Shane Garrett, who had been standing smugly near the nurse's station, bragging about his textbook arrest, freezes mid-sentence. His partner, Ryan Fletcher, instinctively steps backward. As the lead figure approaches, a man whose calm demeanor somehow radiates more danger than any shouting would. "Petty, Officer Mitchell," the man says quietly, his voice carrying an authority that makes every conversation in the ER halt. "We came as soon as we got word." Damon Mitchell looks up from his hospital bed, relief flooding his battered features. "Commander Mendoza, I didn't think You never doubt we'll come," Commander Rafael Mendoza interrupts, his steel-grey eyes shifting to the officers who suddenly looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Now, gentlemen, I believe we need to discuss what happened to one of my Navy SEALs." The realization hits the officers like a freight train. The man they brutally beat isn't just any veteran. 8 hours earlier, Damon Mitchell walked purposefully down Magnolia Street in Cedar Falls, North Carolina. His Navy dress blue uniform was pristine, each crease sharp enough to cut paper. The morning sun caught the ribbons on his chest, a silver star, 2 purple hearts, and a bronze star with V for valor. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. Damon was heading to his weekly appointment with Dr. Kevin Palmer, his psychiatrist at the VA clinic. 6 months ago, an IED explosion in Afghanistan had ended his active duty career with a traumatic brain injury and chronic back pain. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. Nightmares, memory lapses, and the constant struggle to find purpose beyond the brotherhood of the teams. Today felt different, though. He'd received a call from Commander Mendoza the night before about a potential consulting position with Homeland Security. Finally, a chance to serve again, to use his skills for something meaningful. The uniform wasn't required for his doctor's appointment, but Damon wore it because it reminded him who he still was underneath the injuries and limitations. Cedar Falls was a small coastal town that had grown around the nearby Camp Lejeune. Military families were common, and most locals respected the uniform. As Damon walked, he noticed the usual morning bustle, coffee shops opening, commuters heading to work, children being dropped off at school. He passed Martinez Deli, where the owner's son had died in Iraq 2 years ago. Mrs. Martinez always nodded respectfully when she saw him in uniform. Today, she stepped outside and pressed a small American flag pin into his hand. "For luck, mijo," she said softly. Damon tucked the pin into his pocket, unaware that he would need all the luck he could get. The appointment with Dr. Palmer went well. They discussed his progress with EMDR therapy and his excitement about the potential job opportunity. For the first time in months, Damon felt hopeful about his future. "You're making real progress," Dr. Palmer had said. "Remember, healing isn't linear. You've served your country with honor. Now serve yourself with patience." After the appointment, Damon decided to walk the long way back to his apartment. The exercise helped with his back pain, and the familiar weight of the uniform made him feel connected to his identity as a warrior. He had no way of knowing that 2 patrol officers were about to mistake his confidence for arrogance, his pride for defiance, and his service for nothing more than a costume. The streets of Cedar Falls had never felt dangerous to Damon before. He'd survived 3 combat deployments, earned his trident through some of the most grueling training in the military, and led men through impossible missions. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen on his own hometown streets. Officer Shane Garrett was having the worst shift of his career when he spotted the black man in the military uniform walking down Magnolia Street. His patrol partner, Ryan Fletcher, had been complaining all morning about their new beat assignment and the department's sensitivity training requirements. "Look at this guy," Garrett muttered, slowing the patrol car. walking around like he owns the place. Probably stolen valor. Bet that uniform came from a surplus store. Fletcher, eager to prove himself after only 6 years on the force, nodded agreement. Want to check him out? They'd both heard the stories from older officers about the good old days when they could maintain order without worrying about political correctness. Sergeant Murphy had made it clear during roll call that their job was to keep troublemakers from disrupting the peace in the nicer parts of town. Damon noticed the patrol car slowing beside him but continued walking. He'd done nothing wrong and had every right to be on the public street. His training kicked in. Maintain awareness but don't appear threatening. The car's window rolled down. Hey, you! Stop right there! Damon paused, turning slowly with his hands visible. Good morning, officers. Is there a problem? Garrett climbed out of the car, his hand resting on his service weapon. We've had reports of someone impersonating military personnel in this area. Going to need to see some identification. I'm not impersonating anyone, Damon replied calmly. I'm Petty Officer First Class Damon Mitchell, United States Navy. I'm happy to show you my ID. Fletcher joined his partner on the sidewalk. Sure you are, buddy. And I'm General MacArthur. Military guys don't just walk around in dress uniform for no reason. I had an appointment at the VA clinic, Damon explained, reaching slowly for his wallet. My identification is right here. Don't reach for anything, Garrett shouted, though Damon's movements had been deliberately slow and non-threatening. Put your hands where I can see them. Damon raised his hands immediately, his military training overriding his growing frustration. Officers, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I earned these ribbons. I'm just trying to show you my ID like you requested. The situation was escalating beyond reason, but Damon maintained his composure. He'd been taught to de-escalate conflicts, to find peaceful solutions even in hostile environments. Unfortunately, Garrett and Fletcher had been taught something very different about maintaining authority through intimidation. Several passers-by had stopped to watch the confrontation. Among them was Vincent Bear Washington, a Marine veteran who recognized both the uniform and the professional way Damon was handling an increasingly volatile situation. This is about to go very wrong, Bear whispered to his companion, pulling out his phone to start recording. He'd seen too many veterans mistreated by police to stand by silently. What none of them knew was that Damon's SEAL unit was conducting a training exercise just 15 miles away, and that Commander Mendoza always kept his phone on high alert when any of his men were dealing with civilian reintegration challenges. The confrontation spiraled rapidly as more officers arrived. Sergeant Murphy had been monitoring radio traffic and decided this was an opportunity for some field training on handling difficult subjects. What seems to be the problem here? Murphy asked, his bulk intimidating as he approached. This individual is claiming to be military, Garrett reported, refusing to cooperate with identification requests and getting aggressive. Damon remained calm, despite the obvious lies. Sergeant, I've been trying to show my identification since this started. I haven't been aggressive in any way. Murphy looked Damon up and down with obvious disdain. Stolen valor is a federal crime, son. You picked the wrong uniform to play dress-up in. This uniform was earned through 8 years of honorable service, Damon replied, his voice steady but firm. I have my military ID, my VA card, and can provide my unit information for verification. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Vincent Washington continued recording on his phone while calling out encouragement to Damon. That's a real Navy SEAL, officers. Check his damn ID before you embarrass yourselves. Fletcher spun toward the crowd. Everyone back up. This is police business. The attention from bystanders seemed to agitate the officers further. Murphy stepped closer to Damon, invading his personal space in a clear attempt at intimidation. Here's what's going to happen, soldier boy. You're going to turn around, put your hands behind your back, and we're going to sort this out at the station. On what charges? Damon asked, still maintaining his composure despite the rising tension. Disorderly conduct. Resisting arrest, and we'll add stolen valor once we prove that uniform is fake, Murphy replied. Damon knew his rights. He also knew that escalating this situation physically would only make things worse. But his patience was wearing thin, as the officers showed no interest in actually verifying his identity or de-escalating the confrontation. "Officers, I'm asking you one more time to simply look at my identification. I'm a decorated veteran who served this country honorably." "I don't want any trouble," Garrett laughed harshly. "Decorated veteran? The only thing you're decorated with is going to be handcuffs." The crowd murmured angrily at the officer's disrespect. Several people called out that they could vouch for Damon's service, that he was well known in the veteran community. Murphy had heard enough from the peanut gallery. "That's it! Everyone disperse now, or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." As the crowd reluctantly began to back away, Vincent Washington made a crucial decision. He quickly sent the video footage to the local news station and posted it on social media with the caption, "Cedar Falls police harassing decorated Navy SEAL veteran." Within minutes, the video began spreading across veteran social media networks. By the time Murphy gave the order to arrest Damon, the footage had already reached someone monitoring Veteran Affairs social media, Chief Petty Officer Kyle Harrison, who immediately recognized his teammate and grabbed his phone to call Commander Mendoza. The arrest was about to happen, but Damon's Brotherhood was already mobilizing. The officers had no idea they were about to face an enemy far more formidable than they could imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 15 miles away, at the Special Operations Training Facility, Commander Rafael Mendoza was briefing his unit on hostage rescue scenarios when his secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Chief Kyle "Viper" Harrison, a man who never interrupted training unless it was critical. "Commander, you need to see this video." Harrison's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Someone's harassing Mitchell in town." Mendoza pulled up the social media link Harrison sent. The video showed Damon in his dress blues, surrounded by police officers, maintaining perfect military bearing while being treated with obvious disrespect. The comment section was exploding with outrage from the veteran community. "Ghost, Viper, gear up. We're heading to Cedar Falls," Mendoza ordered, his calm voice carrying lethal undertones. Petty Officer Ethan "Ghost" Brooks looked up from his communications equipment. "What's the situation, Commander?" "Local police are about to learn why you don't mess with our family," Mendoza replied, already calculating response times and tactical options. As the team prepared to mobilize, Mendoza placed several strategic calls. First to Admiral Victoria Brennan at Naval Special Warfare Command, then to Colonel Thompson at JAG Corps. Finally, to civil rights attorney Isabella Cruz, who specialized in veteran cases. Each conversation was brief, professional, and set powerful wheels in motion. By the time Mendoza and his team left the base, a federal investigation was already being authorized. Military legal counsel was being dispatched, and a civil rights lawyer known for destroying corrupt police departments was clearing her schedule. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Falls, the situation continued deteriorating. Murphy had ordered Damon to turn around and place his hands behind his back. When Damon complied, asking again what charges were being filed, Garrett accidentally applied the handcuffs too tightly, cutting off circulation. "These are too tight," Damon said calmly. "You're cutting off blood flow." "They're fine," Fletcher replied dismissively. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before playing soldier." The casual cruelty was being recorded by multiple phones now, but the officers seemed oblivious to the growing crowd of witnesses. Vincent Washington had called several other veterans, and word was spreading through the military community faster than Murphy could have imagined. At the VA clinic where Damon had his appointment, Dr. Palmer received a frantic call from a colleague who'd seen the video. "Kevin, isn't that your patient?" The Navy SEAL. Dr. Palmer immediately began making calls to veteran advocacy groups and military family support networks. Within the hour, representatives from 3 different veteran organizations were en route to Cedar Falls. The police dispatcher started receiving calls from concerned citizens, veteran groups, and eventually from higher-ranking military officials asking for information about the detention of Petty Officer Mitchell. Captain Hayes began to realize this wasn't just another routine arrest when her phone rang, with a call from the base commander at Camp Lejeune, but none of them knew about Commander Mendoza and his team racing toward town, or about the methodical way the commander was dismantling their careers with strategic phone calls from the passenger seat of their unmarked vehicle. The officers thought they were in control of the situation. They had no idea they were about to face the most elite warriors in the American military, men who'd sworn an oath to protect each other that transcended rank, regulations, and civilian authority structures. The arrest quickly turned violent when Damon asked for the 3rd time what charges he was facing. Sergeant Murphy, frustrated by the growing crowd and the veteran's calm demeanor, decided to teach him some respect. "You want to know the charges? Here's your charge," Murphy snarled, grabbing Damon by the back of his uniform jacket and slamming him face first against the patrol car. The sickening crack of Damon's forehead hitting the hood was audible to the crowd, followed by gasps of horror as blood began flowing from a gash above his eye. Even handcuffed, Damon's military training kicked in, and he instinctively shifted his weight to absorb the impact and protect his head. This movement was immediately interpreted as resisting arrest. "He's fighting!" Garrett shouted, drawing his baton. "Subject is actively resisting." What followed was a brutal beating that lasted less than 90 seconds, but felt like an eternity to the horrified witnesses. Damon, trained in hand-to-hand combat but handcuffed and refusing to escalate the violence, could only protect his vital organs as best he could while the officers struck him repeatedly. Vincent Washington's live stream of the beating went viral instantly. The hashtag #JusticeForDamon began trending within hours as the video spread across military social networks, veteran Facebook groups, and civilian social justice platforms. 12 minutes after the beating ended, Commander Mendoza's vehicle arrived at the scene. But instead of the dramatic confrontation everyone expected, the commander made a strategic decision that would prove far more devastating to the corrupt officers. "Drive past," he ordered his team. "Don't stop. Ghost, start recording everything. Viper, call the base and request full medical support at Cedar Falls General. We're not going in," Harrison asked, his knuckles white as he gripped his seat. "We're going to destroy them," Mendoza replied calmly. "But we're going to do it the right way. They want to play dirty with one of ours? They're about to learn what real power looks like." Instead of a public confrontation, Mendoza coordinated a response that was methodical and overwhelming. While Damon was being transported to the hospital, the commander was already 3 steps ahead of the police department's damage control efforts. His first call was to Admiral Brennan, who immediately contacted the Secretary of the Navy. Within an hour, a formal complaint had been filed with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The second call went to Major General Patricia Stone at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, who launched an immediate investigation into the treatment of military personnel in Cedar Falls. Most importantly, Mendoza called Isabella Cruz, the civil rights attorney, and provided her with real-time updates on Damon's condition and treatment. Cruz immediately filed federal civil rights violations, complaints, and requested emergency injunctions to preserve all video evidence and police records. By the time the officers finished their paperwork and started their damage control narratives, they were already under federal investigation by multiple agencies. Their body cameras had malfunctioned during the incident, but they hadn't counted on the dozen civilian phones recording from different angles, or on Commander Mendoza's systematic documentation of their every move. After the beating, the local police department's standard playbook of internal investigation and eventual exoneration was about to meet the precision and resources of Naval Special Warfare Command. It would not be a fair fight. The emergency room at Cedar Falls General became ground zero for a confrontation that would reshape the entire police department. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, casting a sterile glow across polished linoleum floors. The air carried the faint tang of antiseptic, mixed with the metallic undertone of blood. Nurses moved quickly but cautiously, their eyes flicking toward the group of newcomers who had just stepped through the double doors. When Commander Rafael Mendoza and his team entered, they did so with the quiet confidence of men who had already won the war before firing the first shot. They weren't loud, they weren't hurried, but their presence changed the atmosphere instantly, as if the entire ER had collectively drawn in its breath and forgotten how to let go. Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending physician on duty, stood at the bedside of Damon Mitchell. Damon, a 32-year-old Navy SEAL, lay unconscious but stable. His injuries were stark, a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and deep bruises along his torso. She had seen victims of car accidents with less trauma. As she adjusted the IV line, she noticed something unusual about Damon's visitors. These weren't ordinary friends or family. Their movements were precise, their speech measured. One positioned himself near the door instinctively, another scanned the hall without appearing to. Their eyes missed nothing. "Petty Officer Mitchell is stable," Dr. Kim reported, her voice carefully professional. "But I am required to ask, how exactly did he sustain injuries consistent with being struck multiple times with a blunt object?" Before Commander Mendoza could answer, a voice cut in from the nurse's station. "Subject was resisting arrest," Officer Shane Garrett said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "We used appropriate force to subdue a combative individual." The tone was defensive, almost rehearsed. Dr. Kim felt her stomach tighten. Commander Mendoza turned slowly, as though he had all the time in the world. His gaze landed on Garrett and pinned him in place. "I'm sorry, officer?" "Garrett." "Officer Shane Garrett. I'm the arresting officer." "Officer Garrett," Mendoza said softly, his tone polite but edged like steel. "I'm Commander Rafael Mendoza, United States Navy Special Warfare Command. The man you beat is Petty Officer First Class Damon Mitchell, a decorated Navy SEAL who has served 3 tours in Afghanistan." The words landed with the weight of a hammer. Garrett's face blanched, his confident posture faltering. Behind him, Officer Fletcher, who had been reviewing paperwork, looked up sharply. The air grew heavy. "Furthermore," Mendoza continued, his voice never rising, "Petty Officer Mitchell is under my direct command. He was conducting authorized activities as part of his medical treatment and transition counseling. Your assault constitutes an attack on a federal service member in the performance of his duties." For a moment, the room seemed frozen. The rhythmic beeping of Damon's heart monitor filled the silence like a drumbeat. Captain Jennifer Walsh, who had rushed to the hospital as soon as word spread, stepped forward. Her uniform was immaculate, but there was tension in her posture. "Commander, I'm Captain Jennifer Walsh. I assure you this matter will be thoroughly investigated through proper channels." Mendoza's eyes never left Garrett, but his reply was directed at Walsh. "Captain Walsh, I appreciate your concern. However, this matter has already been elevated beyond local jurisdiction." His mouth curved slightly, almost a smile. "Admiral Victoria Brennan sends her regards, by the way." The name hit like a shockwave. Brennan was more than an admiral. She was a force in military and political circles, her reputation known even in civilian law enforcement. Walsh's expression flickered, the realization dawning that this wasn't going to be handled quietly with an internal review. Chief Kyle Harrison, dressed in plain clothes but with a posture that screamed prior service, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I documented the entire aftermath," he said firmly. "Every statement, every attempt at medical care or denial of it." From his side, Petty Officer Brooks produced a tablet. He tapped, and the screen lit with time-stamped photos and videos. "We have full documentation: Petty Officer Mitchell's injuries, the officer's conduct, the hospital's responses. Comprehensive, irrefutable." Officer Fletcher found his voice, though it cracked. "Now wait just a damn minute. You guys can't just come in here and take over our investigation. This is a local matter." Mendoza turned his gaze on Fletcher. For the first time, he allowed himself a smile, an expression that somehow carried more menace than anger ever could. "Officer Fletcher, this stopped being a local matter the moment you decided to assault a Navy SEAL. As of right now, federal investigators are reviewing hospital security footage. JAG attorneys are drafting charges, and a civil rights lawyer who specializes in dismantling corrupt police departments has already cleared her calendar specifically for your case." The words hung in the sterile air. Nurses paused at their stations, pretending to work while listening intently. A young orderly carrying a tray froze just long enough to absorb every syllable. The officers, men who had swaggered into the ER certain of their authority, now looked like cornered animals, realizing the cage door had locked from the outside. Dr. Kim, who had been silently observing, felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had treated gunshot victims, stabbing victims, overdose cases, but she had never seen a shift in power so sudden, so absolute. It was like watching a storm sweep through a room without touching a single object. On the bed, Damon stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering. He wasn't fully conscious, but the presence of his commander seemed to anchor him. His lips moved, forming a soundless word that only Mendoza recognized. Family. The SEALs were family. "What happens now?" Captain Walsh asked, her voice quieter this time. She looked less like a commanding officer and more like someone recognizing the ground had just shifted under her feet. "Now?" Mendoza repeated, finally turning his full attention to her. "Now justice happens. The right way. By the book. With the full weight of the federal government behind it." Behind him, Brooks's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and nodded subtly toward Mendoza. "Sir, confirmation. Office of the Inspector General has initiated formal inquiry. DOJ is requesting preliminary files within the hour." Mendoza inclined his head, as though this were expected. "Good. Then the process has already begun." Officer Garrett's breathing quickened. The color had returned to his face, but it was mottled now, tinged with panic. "Commander, it wasn't like that." He was resisting." "Officer Garrett," Mendoza interrupted, his tone still mild. "Save it for the federal court. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself under oath." Garrett closed his mouth with an audible click. Outside the ER, word had begun to spread. Reporters gathered in the lobby, tipped off by whispers of Navy SEAL assaulted by local police. Within hours, the story would hit national networks. Igniting a firestorm, Dr. Kim looked at Damon, at the bruises that marred his ribs, and wondered how many times the police had gotten away with something like this before. The difference this time was that their victim wasn't just another name on a chart. He was someone with a family that wore uniforms, carried rank, and wielded influence that stretched from hospital wards to the Pentagon. Mendoza rested a hand lightly on Damon's shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You're safe now," he murmured, too soft for anyone else to hear. Then he straightened, addressing the room one final time. "Understand this. The era of unchecked power in this department ends tonight. You wanted a fight? You've got one. But you won't win, not this time." The only sound was the steady beeping of the monitor, marking the heartbeat of a man whose suffering had just become the catalyst for a reckoning. And in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by silence and fear, the first domino of an entire police department's downfall had already fallen. Within 72 hours of Damon Mitchell's beating, Cedar Falls had transformed from a quiet southern town into the epicenter of a national reckoning. What might once have been buried in a brief police blotter was instead broadcast across the country, igniting outrage and forcing open long-sealed cracks in the system. The spark was Vincent Washington's shaky cell phone video, posted to social media just hours after the incident. The footage of Damon, bloody, disoriented, and handcuffed, struck a nerve. By the third day, the video had been viewed more than 2 million times, dissected on cable news panels, and reposted by veteran advocacy groups nationwide. Hashtags like Justice for Damon and Protect Our Veterans trended for days, fueling protests outside both Cedar Falls Police Headquarters and City Hall. Into this storm stepped investigative journalist Sofia Rivera, a hard-driving reporter from Raleigh with a reputation for exposing corruption. She had seen plenty of cases of excessive force, but something about Damon's beating and the military connection made her instincts flare. Within hours of arriving in town, she was filing public records requests, cornering officials in hallways, and walking the neighborhoods most residents avoided after dark. What she uncovered was devastating. Over the past 5 years, there had been at least 15 other cases involving veterans or active duty personnel. Each incident carried the same familiar labels in the police database: justified use of force, resisting arrest, suspect combative. Yet in case after case, video evidence was either missing, incomplete, or had technical issues. The pattern was unmistakable, but Rivera's most explosive find was buried in departmental training logs. Sergeant Daniel Murphy, a senior patrol officer, had been specifically assigned to high veteran density neighborhoods after completing so-called military interaction training. In practice, those trainings turned out to be little more than informal sessions, warning officers that veterans could be dangerous, unstable, or likely to snap. Rivera published the story with quotes from veterans describing harassment, intimidation, and fear of the very police sworn to protect them. The revelations demanded more than the city's routine internal review. Within days, a federal team led by Detective Nathan Cross of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division arrived in Cedar Falls. Cross, a methodical investigator with a reputation for tearing down corrupt institutions brick by brick, made clear from his first press conference that this was no token inquiry. "What we're seeing here is not a single bad officer or an isolated mistake," Cross said, his voice steady but uncompromising. "We are investigating a systematic pattern of targeting military personnel. This department will be held accountable." Cross's authority was far broader than that of local internal affairs. He could subpoena records, compel sworn testimony, and pursue criminal indictments at the federal level. Almost immediately, his team uncovered text message chains between officers mocking veterans as damaged goods and walking time bombs. They traced 6 prior incidents involving officers Garrett and Fletcher alone, cases that had all been quietly dismissed. Commander Mendoza, coordinating closely with Naval Special Warfare Command's legal staff, was determined that this would not be swept under the rug. Sitting across from Admiral Victoria Brennan in a secure video call, he spoke with controlled intensity. "This is about more than my sailor," Mendoza insisted. "It's about every veteran who put their life on the line overseas and deserves to come home without being treated like a threat in their own neighborhoods." Brennan didn't hesitate. "You'll have everything you need," she said. With her approval, the full weight of Naval Special Warfare Command joined forces with DOJ prosecutors. Military lawyers cross-referenced federal statutes with service protections, building cases designed not just to punish individuals, but to force systemic reform. Meanwhile, civil rights attorney Isabella Cruz entered the fray. Known for dismantling discriminatory practices in law enforcement, she filed a sweeping federal lawsuit on behalf of Damon and the other veterans Rivera had documented. The suit named not just the officers, but the entire Cedar Falls Police Department and the city government itself, alleging a pattern of constitutional violations. The remedies she sought were sweeping: damages for the victims, mandatory retraining programs, independent civilian oversight, and ongoing federal monitoring of the department. The city's leadership scrambled. Chief Bradford, realizing the existential threat, announced the suspension of Garrett, Fletcher, and Murphy. But his attempt at damage control fell flat. Federal investigators had already traced failures of supervision all the way up the chain of command, documenting memos where senior officials had been warned about targeting veterans and ignored them. The stakes escalated further when Admiral Brennan personally briefed Senator Elizabeth Morrison, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee and a decorated former Marine. Within 24 hours, Morrison announced public hearings on the treatment of veterans by local law enforcement. Standing before reporters in Washington, she spoke with the blunt force of someone who had worn the uniform herself. "When our service members return home," she declared, "they should not have to fear the very institutions they swore to protect." Cedar Falls represents not just a local scandal, but a betrayal of our most basic obligations to those who served. The ripple effects spread like shockwaves. Veteran advocacy groups organized marches in a dozen cities. Base commanders across the country ordered briefings on veteran police relations and began drafting formal protocols for handling misconduct. Editorial boards ran op-eds warning that Cedar Falls was likely just the tip of the iceberg. For Damon himself, recovering slowly in his small apartment, the scale of the response was overwhelming. He spent his days on pain medication, struggling to sleep through the throbbing ache of broken ribs, while his SEAL teammates rotated in and out to provide round-the-clock support. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he admitted quietly to Commander Mendoza one evening as the latter stopped by. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to get through my treatment, figure out my next steps. Now all this, lawsuits, hearings, investigations, it's bigger than me." Mendoza crouched beside him, his tone firm but not unkind. "You didn't ask for this, Damon, but you're in it, and because of you, maybe the next veteran won't have to go through what you did. That's what we do. We protect each other. And sometimes that means protecting people we've never met." Damon closed his eyes, the weight of those words settling in. He hadn't chosen the fight, but perhaps the fight had chosen him. Outside his apartment, cameras waited. Protesters carried signs with his name. Politicians referenced his case in speeches, and somewhere in a Washington briefing room, senators and admirals debated what reforms should come next. Cedar Falls was no longer just a town in crisis. It had become the first battlefield in a larger war over how America treated its veterans once they returned home. And though Damon hadn't planned it, his bruises and scars were now the evidence, his name the rallying cry, and his story the catalyst for change. 3 months after the beating, Damon Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at Camp Lejeune, addressing newly transitioned veterans about their rights and resources. His visible scars had healed, but the deeper impact of his experience had transformed him from a warrior struggling with civilian reintegration to an advocate for veteran rights. "I wore my uniform that day with pride," he told the audience. "I had no idea it would make me a target. But what I learned is that the uniform represents something that terrifies people who abuse their authority. It represents accountability, honor, and the knowledge that we don't stand alone." The legal consequences for the officers had been swift and severe. Officer Garrett received 5 years in federal prison for civil rights violations under color of law. Fletcher received 3 years, and his cooperation with federal investigators helped expose the broader pattern of misconduct. Sergeant Murphy faced the harshest sentence, 7 years, due to his supervisory role and history of similar incidents. More importantly, the Cedar Falls Police Department underwent a court-mandated restructuring. Chief Bradford was forced to resign, and the entire command structure was replaced with officials committed to community-oriented policing and veteran support programs. Captain Walsh, one of the few supervisors who had genuinely tried to address the problems, became the interim chief and implemented comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training, veteran liaison programs, and complete transparency and use of force investigations. The transformation wasn't limited to law enforcement. The incident had exposed deeper issues in Cedar Falls' treatment of its growing veteran population. City Council created a Veterans Affairs Office with real authority to address housing, employment, and healthcare issues facing former military personnel. Damon found his calling as the director of this new office, working directly with both the military community and civilian leadership to build bridges and prevent future conflicts. His experience navigating both worlds, military precision and civilian bureaucracy, made him uniquely qualified to translate between the two cultures. "What happened to me was wrong," Damon said during his first city council presentation. "But what we're building from that wrong could prevent it from happening to anyone else. That makes the fight worth it." Commander Mendoza, who had been promoted to captain following his exemplary handling of the crisis, established the Mitchell Protocol, a formal Navy SEAL team response procedure for incidents involving team members and civilian authorities. The protocol balanced the need to protect SEAL personnel with respect for civilian law enforcement, while ensuring that any misconduct faced immediate and overwhelming consequences. "We take care of our own," Mendoza explained to his new SEAL candidates, "but we also take care of our communities. The two aren't mutually exclusive when you do it right." The ripple effects extended far beyond Cedar Falls. Congressional hearings led by Senator Morrison resulted in federal legislation requiring local police departments that received federal funding to implement veteran sensitivity, training and formal protocols for interacting with military personnel. Perhaps most significantly, the case became a catalyst for broader police reform discussions across the country. The image of a decorated war hero being beaten while in uniform had been impossible for politicians to ignore or dismiss, forcing conversations about accountability that had been avoided for years. For his teammates, watching Damon transform his trauma into advocacy reinforced the SEAL ethos that strength comes not from avoiding difficult challenges, but from meeting them head-on and emerging stronger. Chief Harrison, who had taken over much of the team's training responsibilities, incorporated Damon's experience into their civilian interaction protocols. "You might face enemies overseas," he told new team members, "but you might also face them at home. The uniform is a target for those who fear accountability. Wear it with pride, but wear it with awareness." The brotherhood that had rallied around Damon during his darkest moment had not only protected him, but had transformed an entire community's approach to veteran affairs. It was, as Commander Mendoza often said, exactly what they had trained for, just not in the way any of them had expected. 1 year after the incident that had changed everything, Cedar Falls hosted its first annual Veterans Appreciation Day, organized jointly by the police department, city government, and the Veterans Affairs Office. The transformation of the community was evident in the thousands of attendees, the participation of military families from across the region, and the presence of police officers working alongside veteran advocates. Damon Mitchell, now fully recovered and thriving in his role as Veterans Affairs Director, stood at the podium where a year earlier he could barely speak due to his injuries. Beside him stood Captain Walsh, Commander Mendoza, and Judge Catherine Sterling, who had overseen the federal consent decree that reformed the police department. "A year ago, I was beaten on these streets for wearing my uniform," Damon began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "Today, we gather to celebrate not just those who wore the uniform, but the community that learned to honor what it represents." The audience included Officer Maria Santos, one of several new hires recruited specifically for their experience working with military populations. It also included Dr. Palmer, who had worked with Damon throughout his recovery and had helped design the department's new veteran crisis intervention protocols. Vincent Bear, Washington, whose quick thinking in recording the original incident had been crucial to the case, now served as a volunteer coordinator for veteran outreach programs. His footage had become part of police training curricula across the country, used to demonstrate how quickly situations can escalate and why procedural safeguards matter. The legal victories had been comprehensive, but were just the beginning. Isabella Cruz, the civil rights attorney who had dismantled the department's corrupt practices, established a non-profit organization specifically focused on protecting veteran rights in civilian communities. The Damon Mitchell Foundation provided legal support, advocacy training, and community education programs. What we learned, Cruz explained during her keynote address, is that veterans don't want special treatment. They want equal treatment. They want the same constitutional protections they swore to defend, applied fairly and consistently. Commander Mendoza, now overseeing veteran transition programs for all East Coast SEAL teams, had institutionalized the lessons learned from Damon's case. The military now maintained formal liaison relationships with civilian law enforcement agencies, providing education about military culture while learning about community policing challenges. The brotherhood extends beyond active duty, Mendoza told the crowd. When our teammates transition to civilian life, they carry with them the values and training that made them effective warriors. Our job is to help civilian communities understand that those qualities are assets, not threats. The most significant change was cultural. Cedar Falls had evolved from a military town where service members were tolerated to a community where they were genuinely valued. Local businesses created veteran hiring initiatives. Schools developed military family support programs, and civic organizations actively recruited veteran participation. Judge Sterling, reflecting on the legal precedents established by the case, noted how it had influenced law enforcement practices nationally. The Mitchell case demonstrated that accountability isn't anti-police, it's pro-justice. Departments that embrace transparency and genuine community partnership are stronger and more effective. As the ceremony concluded, Damon was approached by a young Marine who had recently returned from deployment. The Marine thanked him for fighting back, for not accepting injustice, and for creating a safer environment for other veterans. You showed us that we don't have to choose between honoring our service and demanding our rights, the young Marine said. That's a lesson worth more than any medal. Later that evening, as the community celebration wound down, the key figures in the transformation gathered at Martinez Deli, the same place where Mrs. Martinez had given Damon the flag pin that he still carried. She had prepared a feast for the group, treating them like the extended family they had become. Commander Mendoza raised his coffee cup in a toast to Damon Mitchell, who reminded us that the fight for justice doesn't end when we come home. It just changes battlefields. The story that began with one veteran being brutalized for wearing his uniform had become a catalyst for systemic change that protected countless others. The SEAL motto, "The only easy day was yesterday," had taken on new meaning. Each day required continued vigilance to maintain the progress they had achieved. As they shared stories and planned future initiatives, it was clear that what had started as a response to injustice had become something larger, a model for how military communities and civilian law enforcement could work together with mutual respect and shared purpose. The badge and the uniform, symbols that had been in conflict a year earlier, now represented a partnership dedicated to protecting and serving all members of the community. It was, perhaps, the most important mission any of them had ever undertaken. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.